Drought, flooding, wildfires. The impact of man-made climate change is being felt already today. And it's set to get worse if we, planet, do not mobilize sufficient resources to stop it. Welcome to AIIB's flagship discussion on raising the ambition to meet the climate challenge. My name is Michael Swider. I'm based in Singapore. I'm your host today. And I'm very passionate about promoting thought leadership, something which is desperately needed when it comes to the issue of climate finance. Well, today, the AIIB is articulating its thought leadership on this issue with the launch of the very first Climate Action Plan. To tell us more about it, please join me in welcoming to the stage Sir Danny Alexander, AIIB's Vice President.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you everybody for joining us. In particular, welcome to Minister Sri Mulyani from Indonesia and the Minister of Finance of Nepal, who will also join the panel. Thank you all to our panelists. Also for joining us. And I'm very pleased to welcome you here on behalf of our President, Jin Chun, and to open this flagship event on climate change, and specifically to launch AIIB's Climate Action Plan. You'll see these little cards. There's no printed copies of the Climate Action Plan, for good reasons, but you can scan this QR code and download it and see exactly what we're planning to do. Because, as Michael said, this year has seen temperature records repeatedly broken, increasingly severe flooding, out of control forest fires in many places. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has spoken of 2023 as marking the start of the climate breakdown. And so it is with a sense of urgency and determination that we are all here today to address the climate challenge, which is global, transcends borders, and requires collective action of unprecedented proportions. The alarm bells are ringing louder than ever, urging us to take ambitious strides within this decade to avert the severe consequences of global warming. The yardsticks we have set, encapsulated within the Paris Agreement, urge us to pursue efforts to curtail global warming to the critical threshold of 1.5 degrees. This calls for action on a global scale. And AIIB is fully committed to playing our part in this monumental endeavour in Asia and beyond. Addressing the scale of the climate challenge requires focus on the sobering realisation of the enormous climate financing needs. Estimated at 4.3 trillion. Easy mistake to make, but the scale is rather different. 4.3 trillion annually by 2030 to keep the 1.5 degree goal alive. And equally important is the need to deploy funds to address mitigation, adaptation, and preserve our precious natural ecosystems together. In the face of the financing needs, MDBs were tasked to reform and redefine their vision and operational approach here in Sharm El Sheikh at COP27 last year. Mobilizing private capital and igniting innovation are no longer aspirations, but imperatives. AIIB is heeding this call for reform and inter-MDB collaboration. Our President, Jin Chun, has personally been calling for enhanced strategic collaboration amongst MDBs for the common goals, to hardwire, if you like, the cooperation in the system, specifically around climate change. And through platforms spanning countries and sectors, capitalizing on our collective expertise and amplifying our impact across the MDB system. Now, AIIB was born in 2016, just a few weeks after the Paris Agreement was signed. And so, recognizing the need for urgent action and significant action, and reflective of developments to date, AIIB is launching its first climate action plan for the period through to 2030. The plan reflects the latest global and Asian climate context, global policy developments, our climate commitments. We were actually able to achieve this 3 years early. 56% was the figure for last year, 2022. But of course, it's not something you achieve in 1 year only. You have to keep meeting it year after year after year as our overall capacity grows. And so we need to ensure that we continue to deliver on these ambitions and accentuate further the impact of financing. Moreover, the compass of guiding our investments is firmly fixed on the Paris Agreement. all new AIIB investments are aligned to the goals of the Paris Agreement from the 1st of July this year onwards. So our Climate Action Plan develops 4 guiding principles for AIIB's financing, together with setting out some key actions to better meet the needs of our members, while taking in the need also for AIIB to continue to improve its own corporate practices. The 4 principles are, firstly, client-focused, meeting the differentiated needs of members for a just approach to climate finance. And the needs vary enormously, as I'm sure we'll hear in the discussion today. The second is impact, thinking and taking a holistic approach on mitigation, adaptation, resilience, biodiversity, and nature conservation together as far as possible. The third principle is to be catalytic, mobilizing capital with AIIB's robust financial position and ability to absorb risk, and through fortifying also our financial partnerships with many other organizations, including providers of concessional finance. And lastly is to be innovative, and in particular, facilitating technical innovation for mitigation and adaptation, supporting new technologies, but also innovating internally, thinking about new products, such as, for example, climate policy-based financing. Our bank finances infrastructure principally in Asia, but also beyond, and is acutely aware of the differentiated needs of members for resilient and low-carbon infrastructure. Hundreds of millions of people in Asia are directly vulnerable to the effects of climate change today, let alone in a few years' time. Many of those people live in countries that have contributed almost nothing to the carbon emissions that are causing climate change. On the other hand, Asia as a whole today is the source of half of all of global greenhouse gas emissions and is disproportionately opposed to physical climate risk. We believe that infrastructure is a solution. Asia's vast renewable energy potential is waiting to be harnessed with existing and new clean energy technologies. Opportunities also exist to distribute clean energy more evenly across the region to assist our members to accelerate their energy transitions. Solutions exist to make infrastructure more resilient, including nature-based solutions. But just as important as addressing climate should be the need to harness Asia's capacity to innovate, to transform, and to ensure that this is a new economic opportunity also. As part of our undertaking to more effectively cater to client needs while accounting for the evolving contours of the climate challenge, the Climate Action Plan introduces some new approaches and products to complement our existing financing initiatives. And we aim to work closely with our clients as a client-led institution to advance our climate ambitions. And the key is mobilizing finance to the level needed from all sources, public, private, concessional, philanthropic, to the levels needed to address the climate challenge. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. I hope that gives you a sense of our Climate Action Plan. As I say, scan the QR code to learn more, and thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Danny. As you mentioned, last year when delegates came from around the world here to Sharm El Sheikh for COP27, they called on MDBs to substantially increase climate financing and to define a new vision to address the global climate emergency. It's great to see that the AIIB recognizes its responsibility and is rising to the challenge. Speaking of challenges, our next speaker does not shy away from them. She co-chairs the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. She was named East Asia and the Pacific's Finance Minister of the Year for her efforts in handling the COVID-19 pandemic. Congratulations on that. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Her Excellency, Indonesia's Minister of Finance, Sri Mulyani Indrawati.
Thank you so much. Sir Danny, Minister of Finance from Nepal, my colleague, other participants, panelists, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to all of you. It is really an honor for me to be invited here in a seminar with a very important topic, that is raising the ambition to address the climate change challenge and mobilizing the resource for climate finance. I think today I've been in 3 different speeches, and they are all talking about climate finance. So forgive me if I speak something which is already being spoken earlier. I would like to express appreciation to AIIB and all distinguished participants, and especially for the speaker that is joined to this seminar with a very important topic. We all know that investment, especially for the climate action, is always complex and intricate. There is no simple solution, and there is no simple project if we talk about the climate finance. And that's required 2 very important things, financing and technology. I believe that this forum could provide how the international community can collaborate to be more effectively addressing the issue of climate finance. As mentioned by the moderator, that I'm also a chair together with my colleague from Netherlands on a climate action for especially among finance ministers. And the discussion is actually quite important to see how the policy, regulation, and then financing instrument and action can be done within the context of public policy. I would like to congratulate AIIB that is now also supporting ASEAN countries to better facilitate through this infrastructure for tomorrow, especially on the green infrastructure with sustainability, innovation, connectivity at its core. Also, the launching of this today on the AIIB Climate Action Plan. This is all creating a more, not only just commitment, but also action that can be taken by institutions as important as AIIB in being part of the solution for this climate action. As mentioned by Sir Daniel earlier, climate finance, I mean, you can pick any number. Earlier, 300 billion become 2 trillion, now 4.5 trillion. But the keep is continue increasing. While the threat of the climate change is actually now felt by all countries in the world. If you talk about Paris Agreement, we definitely remember the 100 billion commitment which is need to be delivered. And that is still in the process. This is despite 2015 that we are discussing about that. So how we are going to make sure that in each of the meeting we are going to make a progress. There is quite a lot of commitment, but implementation is more and more important. And that's why in this case, I would like to contribute, especially from the Indonesian point of view, and providing also few perspective as well as the uniqueness of each country position to the institution like multilateral development bank like AIIB, which playing more and more important role in providing financing to many developing countries. I heard since this morning, even President Sisi mentioned concessional financing. As a finance minister, I know that the word concessional financing is very important for many finance ministers, especially during this time when the world is facing with a high inflation, high interest rate, higher for longer. So it's becoming more expensive, becoming unaffordable for many countries to even doing their development program, not to mention also to overcome the challenge of the climate change. So financing is very important. I mentioned this morning in many forums and in the 2 occasions that blended finance for the climate finance is very, very important because each project cannot and will not rely only on one source of finance. If we talk about the need for financing comes in your mind, government should step in. But that will not adequate. MDB should step in. That will not be also adequate even if you try to max out your capital adequacy framework balance sheet maximization. You need private sector, philanthropy is there, but the challenge for all of us is how you are going to be able to create the blended finance that work. What kind of cooperation format structure that really work. In this case, I would like to urge AIIB to also learn and look into detail. For example, you look at the blended finance with the 3 largest financial intermediary funds, which is already operated, like Global Environment Facility, GEF, and then Climate Investment Fund, CIF, and Green Climate Funds. If you try to blend it, source of finance different, with the different governance, then you can imagine who's going to get the headache is the recipient country. Because then you are dealing with the procurement of the MDB and all those other source of financing with the 3 different or many different processes as well as the governance. So how we are going to not making many of the client country becoming overwhelmed with this kind of concept of blended finance. Indonesia have quite a lot of experience that I would like to share. First, I would like to give you where the Indonesia position. We are being seen as or recognized as the 11th largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. But this is the total emission. If you divide it by the population, we are on the 24th largest emitter per capita. That is 1.8 tons of CO2 equivalent emission per person in the year of 2022. Given that, Indonesia know that with our high population, big geographical, and also quite large, diverse natural resources, we have the responsibility. We are not avoiding this responsibility, but we communicating where we are, what we could do, and what is the opportunity, and how we can continue developing a platform of collaboration. Our NDC, National Determined Contribution, has been even enhanced. 2 years ago, we improved into the reduction of 31.89%, our own effort, and 43.2% reduction of CO2 if we work together with the global. And we commit to the zero emission by 2060 or sooner. So how we are going to finance all this NDC and the commitment in a credible way? First, and the most important, is we have to mobilize our own domestic resources. There is no country can implement their climate action if their fiscal situation is not healthy and sustainable. Many countries now is in that kind of position. High debt, high interest rate, and non-sustainable. Indonesia is doing all our work, hard work, even during pandemic, and have to do a counter-cyclical to face with this, the threat of life because of pandemic, as well as recovering our economy. But we can still maintain our fiscal position sound and sustainable. Our debt to GDP is 39%, which is among the lowest in the G20 and ASEAN. I will not compare to the UK, to the Sardinian countries, or many other countries. We continue also improving our reform on a domestic resource mobilization, making sure that our state finance is going to be healthy and sustainable, because that is going to be one of the most important of the foundation for any country to continue develop, including delivering our NDC. Indonesia also reforming and introducing many regulations in order for us to be able to equip ourselves. Many of them is totally new. Carbon tax, carbon market. We don't know, and we never actually implement that. Even some of the people asking, do we really have to have that? As a finance minister, they will ask me, you've already collect tax from us a lot. Now you are also going to impose carbon tax? Who's going to pay? carbon market is something which is not yet familiar. And that's why when we are talking about polluter pay principle translated into regulation policy, there are quite a lot of first communication publicly in a way that you are going to get support politically, not only from the former political party, but population in general. I'm glad that we are going to have speaker coming from girls, which is young, because the younger generation, they are the one who is more and more aware about this climate change threat. And that's why we investing quite a lot of our political communication through reaching out for this young population. So we discuss about how much it will cost if we are not doing anything, and how much is our budget allocated for the climate change. We introduce climate tagging, so that is becoming more transparent, both national and local government. But as much as we are investing with the public money, it will not adequate. We also developing our blended finance. We also developing instrument. So Indonesia is among the first emerging country to issue the green bonds in a Sharia, that is the sukuk base. We also have the SDG bonds, blue bonds. The SDG bond was issued just before the COVID, and that was the lowest rate ever for the 10 years that we are issuing for the SDG bonds. These are all the instruments that we tried to introduce in order for us to be able to max out the public fund for delivering the commitment on climate change. But this is not going to be adequate. Private sector is actually the largest source of financing. But how they are going to be able to finance any project is really depend on first the regulatory framework. And that's why Indonesia with the ASEAN country, as a chairman of the ASEAN this year, we introduced ASEAN Taxonomy version 2. This second version introducing the retirement of the coal power plant within the context of this taxonomy. Because currently with the ESG and many of the regulatory framework, any financial institution financing coal will be seen as that you are financing the non-green project. And that creates additional risk for each of these financial institutions. But what about a country who tried to reduce the coal by shortening the duration or the length of the coal operation? That will require also capital, and that's why we work very closely with many of the regulatory and standard setting and also with the capital market. Indonesia also needs to continue making sure that this taxonomy is not only operating in the ASEAN, because at the end, financing is coming globally. And that's why interoperability of this taxonomy across the region globally is going to be very important. The government now work with all the stakeholders like the Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, Adaptation Fund, International Financial Institution, MDBs, development partner, and private sector, including philanthropies. So you can imagine that this is going to be a quite big tent with a lot of stakeholders. It's always busy, but we want to make sure it's not only busy, but effectively deliver what we needed. Lastly, I think we would like to also introduce the approach that the Indonesia continue developing. As we mentioned, that Indonesia launched the energy transition mechanism during the pandemic, during the presidency of the G20 last year. This has attracted quite a lot of interest, and at the same time, we have to deliver a platform, SDG Indonesia 1, the country platform for the energy transition mechanism by our special mission vehicle. This ETM providing quite a lot of support, real action, including from the Climate Investment Fund that can be leveraged for time. CIF providing 500 million, then scaling up by the MDBs, including World Bank, ADB and others. I will invite AIIB to look at this, and that is going to be one of another thing, how we can retire 1.5 gigawatt of coal-fired power plant. The key challenge for this is the cost. The private sector will accept the risk as well as return in a more flexible way, and at the same time, it is affordable from the public sector, including PLN, our state-owned enterprises. We also launched the Just Energy Transition Partnership with a committed $20 billion for the public and private. Now it's time for us to work on a detail to deliver this 20 billion into a real action. We are finalizing comprehensive investment and policy plan, or CIPP, to translate this commitment into a tangible result. Lastly, I would like to say that in all this endeavor, the social aspect is also very important. Any decision on a climate change will have a huge and significant social dimension. And that's why in Indonesia, we also conducting strategic environment and social assessment in order for us to make sure that any decision on an investment related to the climate change, the society and the people surrounding it is going to be impacted in a positive way. It's not always easy, but I think this is a good guideline for all of us to make sure that those commitments, a big global commitment, can be delivered consistently at the micro project level. Thank you so much, and I would like to again congratulate AIIB for continue increasing and providing resources for many of the client countries, and also to be more innovative and creative in using your resources so that you are going to have the maximum impact or result for not only on your client country, but globally. Thank you again, and have a very productive discussion.
Thank you, Minister Indrawati. Very interesting to hear you talk about the need for concessional loans, domestic resource mobilization, and if I heard correctly, you issued a call, a challenge to people in the room to help Indonesia retire its coal plants. So let's do that. Climate and environmental issues, perhaps more than any other, involve intergenerational equity. What will the planet be like for future generations? What will our children inherit? Our next speaker is a young professional, but one who is no stranger to climate financing. In fact, she's already raised billions of dollars, billions, to abate carbon emissions. Please join me in welcoming Yale Climate Fellow, Sarah, I practiced and here I didn't get it, Sarah Al-Harti.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. So, first of all, Your Excellencies, esteemed participants and panelists, and AIIB, thank you so much for having us here today. I'd like to commend the choice of Sharm El Sheikh. I was here with my fellow climate activists, witnessing the Sharm El Sheikh mitigation ambition and implementation work program that focused on addressing financial, technical, and capacity building with the provision of supporting the Global South and developing countries through international cooperations and non-party stakeholders' involvement. So thank you again for having us here, and pretty much this meeting embodies the soul of Sharm El Sheikh work program. I would like to share a little story about me. Last year, I went to a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan, which houses more than 80,000 refugees who fled the war from Syria, which is one of the largest humanitarian crises you might know. I volunteered to go there to teach young children about the environment and climate change. I sat with children and I told them about how important it is to grow and care for trees. Little that I knew that these kids never saw trees in their lives. because they were born in the camp. In fact, these kids taught me what it means to live a post-climate reality, a post-climate disaster reality, and how to live like a climate refugee. Jordan is one of the most water-scarce countries in the world and vulnerable to drought. To be a refugee is to live in extreme heat, no air conditioning, limited access to basic needs of life, environmental degradation, soil erosion, depletion, pollution, and all of that. Going there, it felt post-apocalyptic, honestly. And I asked myself, what future are we heading to? 2 weeks ago, 1,000 kilometers away from where we are right now, Libya flooded. And Libya floods killed thousands and displaced thousands of people. Extreme weather have created a full-scale humanitarian crisis. And scientists confirmed that climate change has made this extreme rainfall 50 times more likely and 50% more intense. But who cares about the global south calamities? What we hear in news headlines is Canada wildfires. We see the smokes over New York and New Jersey. We hear about how Europe had the July hottest climate on record, or the California storms, or the rain bombs somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere. For years, Global South has been faced with climate and ecological crisis and extreme heat and weather events without any level of attention. Disaster anywhere is a disaster everywhere. And climate impact has no borders. Climate is moving faster with an immediate impact, and the system have failed us. Politics of climate have made it very hard to bring the public will together. What more do we need to recognize? That the climate clock is racing, and that we are in a war-like state. We feel it, we see it, it's here, it's around us. The system have failed us as youth in particular. Imagine as if you didn't see my slides. So the system have failed us as youth in particular. So this is a snapshot from the IPCC AR6 synthesis report, and it says clearly that the world that this generation and next generation will live is so much hotter and different than the world that the previous generation have lived. This is very much about generational equity, as you said. And it's very much about climate justice. The impact is there everywhere, but it's not equal. And the world is not uniform. We have different levels of vulnerability and different stages of development, capacity, and capabilities. What do we want to see as youth? We want to see ambition, but ambition that goes beyond pledges and words. Ambition to act quickly, swiftly. Ambition that is short-term, not in the long term, not 2100 or 2060 or 2050. Ambition to drive a systematic change, not the business as usual. And an ambitious financial system that works for us and that serves us. We want to see democratization and access to capital. In the global south, the borrowing of of private capital is ridiculously expensive. It's tied with political risk, currency risk, corruption risk, everything risk. We care about the risk associated with our money, more about the people at risk. That's why we want MDBs to take off all of these layers of risks and change the mentality from the fear of crowding the private sector and the stringent policies into the courage to stand up, to champion the correct risk pricing, and to challenge the private sector with their assumed risks. The international financial architecture needs a new mandate, and it's people and the planet first. And the recognition of the underlying structural problem, which is the innate inequality of our world and of climate change. Global income and wealth inequalities is very much tightly connected with ecological inequalities. And investing in the global south is needed, but investing in the sovereignty, self-determination of the global south, and the choice of investing in equality. As someone working in climate and clean energy, and being an activist in that space, I believe in the importance of investing in energy and in a resilient energy infrastructure. Energy delivered, cheap, affordable, sustainable, with the least environmental impact is the solution. The IPCC mitigation report showed us that solar and wind renewable energy are the best contenders to solve our climate crisis. So we have the solution, right? Good news. We have renewable energy, we have the technology, so let's just scale it, make it cheap, increase capacity, do more expansions to our energy system. But unfortunately, the biggest challenge for the global south is access to equity and capital to do these projects. The mispricing of risk, the access to financing. In my country, I work in Saudi Arabia. We've been able to drive the price of solar and wind energy to a really low prices, about 1 to 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And I wonder when I see reports about a country like Zambia, where the price for electricity from renewable sources is 3 times, 4 times, 5 times higher. Why is that? Why the cost of financing in different parts of the world is different, and the cost to access electricity is different. When you have energy that is so expensive, you only do the bare survival with that energy. But if you give it cheaply, sensibly priced, then this is limitless opportunities of prosperities, job creation, the economic multipliers that you guys like to talk about. We have today an opportunity, and a life in a time opportunity. Through our actions that we take to change the energy architecture and the industrial platforms, and recreate an architecture for the world together for a shared prosperity. We can bring and bridge the gap between ambition and action, stopping arguing about ambition in a vacuum, and putting the money for action to finance these projects. We can create an action plan that addresses the impairment to act, action plan that mobilizes financial resources, working with the people for the people across the world. And I'm here to tell you that this action plan needs to be youth-centric and youth-led and based on youth inclusion. Mobilization of youth as partners in the conversation is very much important. Youth climate entrepreneurship, for instance, have produced so many innovations and solutions. The problem, not enough recognition and not enough finance to help these innovations to come to reality. We need to recognize youth as an important stakeholder in these conversations. The Global South is not a passive victim in this climate emergency, but an active participant in this fight. And the world must listen to us, must listen to the Global South, learn from us, invest in us. Make sure that no voice or no solution is left unheard. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. That was incredibly inspiring. Thank you for driving home how climate change is intensifying and how we need to take urgent action today and how we need to put the perspective on people and not on risk. As you said, we all need to rise to the challenge, and Asia in particular has a critical role to play. I invite you to stay because we have an intriguing panel of experts who are going to drive home exactly what we can do to meet this. I would like to invite them to join me on stage, and I'll introduce them once they're here. All right, joining me on stage in the first chair next to me there, His Excellency Nepal's Minister of Finance, Prakash Mahat. He is also co-chair of the Global Environment Facility. Daniel Calderon is based in Dubai, and he's the co-founder of Alcazar Energy, which invests in sustainable infrastructure projects like solar and wind energy. AIIB is one of Alcazar Energy's leading investors. Dana Barsky is based in Singapore, like myself, where she's the global head of sustainability strategy and net zero at Standard Chartered Bank. She's an expert in mobilizing capital to address climate change. Todd Wilcox is the deputy chairman and CEO of HSBC Egypt. He has also held leadership roles with HSBC in China, Brunei, and Bermuda. And we heard from Sir Danny Alexander at the beginning of our session. He's the vice president for strategy and policy at AIIB. He leads AIIB's environmental and social policies. Okay, I'm going to join our panel here. We heard during the keynotes that a huge amount of money, estimated at least $4 trillion is needed every year if we are going to keep the world's temperature from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. $4 trillion, possibly more. Yet how much are we spending today? $650 billion. That is a massive shortfall. My first question is for every panelist here. I've given them the challenge of answering in 60 seconds or less, and it is, what is one actionable step from their perspective that can be taken to scale up climate finance? Mr. Prakash.
Basically, what advanced countries should do is to fulfill their commitment. They are not fulfilling their commitment. That is the problem.
Daniel.
So look, we need decisiveness. This is the first time in our careers that we see a lot more deals than capital chasing deals. Renewable energy has been very slow to grow, and because of that, we're used to see more money than deals. And because of human psychology, many people here are sitting on decisions and are not making investment decisions, just hoping that the cost of capital continues to increase. Maybe we can make a little bit more if we went 6 months more. We have to go away from that. We need to make decisions now, and we need to allow those funds to move now.
Dana.
I thought long and hard about this, and I could say I wish MDBs made more guarantees. I wish the private sector gave more, local currency lines. But the reality is, we all in our own organizations know what we can and cannot do better than anyone else. And what I call on people to do, this actionable step, is to really reflect on where we as organizations can push our boundaries to bring capital more quickly, and to just think about things and reflect on things a bit more as to what we can change to try to address climate change.
Push the boundaries. Todd.
Boy, I'm going to play a little bit on what you've said, Dana, and for us, we've got a commitment to have our whole portfolio to net zero by 2050, which means all our client base. And what I'm realizing quite quickly is that takes a series of iterative steps that we need to move more quickly. And it's transition plans. And as quickly as we're having clients give us transition plans, we're learning what's needed, what works, what doesn't work, and they're learning the same. And that learning cycle, and everyone taking responsibility, but it means an education and a plan. And it really is about those iterative steps that need to happen across all industries.
I mean, I should say, implement AIIB's climate action plan, which we will do. But I think the key is that this challenge is so complex and so multifaceted, as Sri Mulyani was saying, that it's the partnerships that matter, that all the different kinds of organizations working together are going to be needed to make this transition happen in a way that is fair and just and recognizes and responds to the challenges in many different kinds of places around the world.
So I'm hearing honor the commitments and let's have partnerships. Asia is disproportionately vulnerable to climate change. Low-lying coastal areas and cities are subject to flooding. Up in the Himalayas, glaciers are melting. Efforts to address climate change, though, do not happen in a vacuum. Sarah talked about this. Developing countries must grapple with a host of issues: demographics, extreme poverty, inequalities. So, Minister Prakash, what I want to ask you is, given this reality, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that countries like Nepal face when it comes to scaling up climate finance?
For Nepal, being a Himalayan country, of course we have flat land too, but we have the long Himalayan range. We used to see when we were a child, the fully, snow-covered mountains, but now it's slowly, it's melting and you can see darkness there, the barren. So challenge is real. And Nepal is the least polluters, least emitters. And most of these challenges come from outside. So that is why we want support from richer countries. For example, we have limited resources. From our own, through our own efforts, we are investing a lot in hydropower. So now we are almost like self-sufficient, started selling our electricity to India as well, exporting as well. So we are doing our bit. But thing is, we have a lot of other priorities: education, health, and infrastructure. So we need additional resources. And when it comes to this balancing the climate, it means higher cost for development. That means we cannot afford to finance all these development works without support from outside. When support coming from outside, it mostly comes in the market rate. Concessional rate is very limited. Grant is declining drastically. So that is the kind of situation we are in, and many other low-income countries as well. So I think firstly, that is why I said richer countries should fulfill their commitments. We have seen countries withdrawing from Paris Agreement and coming back. So there is still uncertainties in international front. So, but on our own, we are very much aware of this climate change and which is affecting us. So we are doing our best. And therefore, I will say this, the carbon trading issues, a remunerative market rate for this carbon market, that is a must. And debt for this nature swap is a must. And basically, higher financing for the low and, medium countries. Low income and medium countries.
Thank you, Minister. We've heard from Danny how the AIIB is unveiling its new climate action plan. It's committed to scaling up climate financing, yet the bank recognizes that the resources at the multilateral development banks are quite limited. So it also wants to mobilize private sector investment. Dana, as someone who works on sustainability and also works in a global bank, what, in your view, can be done to increase investment that focuses on climate change?
Actually, first I wanted to commend AIIB on the climate action plan. I read it under embargo, and I have to say, it's really excellent. It's quite comprehensive, and it brings in different elements of adaptation, transition, biodiversity, gender impact. And it's, I really encourage everyone to read it. And one thing it does also highlight, I think the quote is, working better together. And to Sir Danny's point on partnerships, I think partnerships are really key here. I mean, a lot of people have spoken on it today, but I just want to say, partnerships can take many forms. It's co-financing, but it also could take forms such as creating new special purpose vehicles together to try and tackle specific challenges. It could be splitting up capital structures in new and different ways. And I have to say, as a bank, I'm pretty proud that this panel that was put together randomly, our bank has actually worked with all of you across the board, from hydro projects to solar to multiple projects that I guess we both had together, both banks. And I think that speaks to a great start, but there's so much more we could do. Another thing in the climate action plan that's referenced is innovation. And I think that's really important. And we talk about, and the report talks about technological innovation and cites a statistic that the International Energy Agency cites that 50% of carbon reductions by 2050 will be from technologies that are only prototypes currently. And just think about that is amazing. And so there's technological innovation, but I also think we really need to consider innovation in structuring, innovation in policy setting, and just innovation to try to address these long-term issues and challenges that come from infrastructure. And the last thing I'll mention is a need from this change in technology to change the way that we diligence and invest in climate. As a bank, and I'm sure my fellow colleagues will agree, we have a tendency to look at what's the history been, what are the profile of these investments been historically. But as we have to start rolling out the most technologically advanced technology, we need to think about how to diligence these opportunities better to make more projects bankable. And I think one specific recommendation that I would make is, let's bring in the experts. Let's bring in those people that we may not have relied on as much to try to understand, as financial institutions, how we can accept the risks of these emerging technologies and invest in them now, and just increase investment generally from bringing in this kind of more comprehensive, holistic viewpoint.
Thank you, Dana. Todd, I want to ask you a similar question, but from a slightly different perspective. As someone at HSBC, what do you think is needed for the commercial banking sector to increase climate financing, to play a larger role?
Well, I guess there's two things. One is the partnership we've already talked about. We've seen some successful partnerships out there that we've participated in, JETP projects in Indonesia, Vietnam. We've got one here in Egypt that's underway, Nuafi, which is the nexus for water, food, and energy. We're actively participating in the energy sector, looking at how to make this bankable and real. And I think getting in at the early stages, Michael, is the way to go. So we're in discussion with the government and EBRD, who's leading that project, and us. So I think early engagement is what we need to do to really commercialize it. I also agree with Dana on the green tech piece, that if you look at some analysis, they'll say that 50% of the carbon savings we need to achieve, or carbon reduction we need to achieve, is going to come from green tech, and really an investment in that. And it's really about carving off a piece of your portfolio that you're going to dedicate to that sector and really understanding it better. So we've just said we'll put $1 billion into green tech, and that's the beginning. And we need to recognize that we're in the very early stages. Those partnerships, those innovative structures, we need to go faster and really get to know what works in tech quite quickly. Bring in those experts, but build the expertise as well. The one piece that we launched at COP27, I'm trying to think which COP we're at, COP27 last year was fast infra. And really, that's about speeding things up as well, that if you've got an infrastructure project, we can expedite it through and give it credibility to go to the market early stage. And I think all this is good. We just need to do more faster.
Thank you, Todd. Daniel, if we look at climate financing, most of the activity seems to be on, or I should say most of the attractive revenue streams are focused on mainstream renewable energy, yet the needs go significantly beyond that. What do you think can be done to make a broader range of mitigation and adaptation opportunities attractive to private equity investors?
Yeah, thank you. So for background, Michael told us to be very punchy on the first question, and I didn't get the chance to thank Sir Danny and everyone at AIIB for having us here today, as well as the government of Egypt. I feel I have to tell you, AIIB was not just an investor in our second fund. We're a Luxembourg-domiciled Article 9 fund, and AIIB was a lender to us in our first fund as well, in 2 of our projects. And it has been really a pleasure working with them from our very early days 10 years ago. So to look at the issue of what opportunities we see in mitigation and adaptation, we'd like to start by looking at the size of the mitigation gap. Today, when you look just what we have to do between now and 2030, and the numbers I'm going to give you are Bloomberg terminal based on current policies as of today. To get to the 2030 policies that have been approved, we need 3.5 terawatts, which is about $4.7 trillion. But right now, we care here about emerging markets. So in emerging markets, we need about 750 gigawatts, which is about $1 trillion, roughly. At Alcázar, we focus in just 14 emerging markets, and those need 85 gigawatts or $100 billion. Why am I telling you that? Because whether you're worried about the global issue, the emerging market issue, or just your individual markets, it's a big issue. Whether you're investing $1 trillion or $100 billion, coming here, in all cases, is 3 to 4 times what has been done until today. What does that mean? To get here was difficult. We all did a great job, but we didn't displace conventional power. We're creating new green jobs, well done, but to get from here to 4.7 trillion, that's 3 to 4 times what we have today. That means that $1 trillion, that 750 gigawatts, is going to have to display, as Sarah was saying. We're going to have to do something about the environmental disaster. And we're going to have to displace some gas and some coal. But what you have to think about is about the people who work in those coal plants today, the people who work in those gas plants today. Those of us who are lucky enough to work with some of the governments in emerging markets, we're talking about tens of thousands, and in some of our countries, hundreds of thousands of families, of employees, who work for these plants. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think the issue of mitigation is one of us adapting our investment strategies of renewable energy to mitigate the social impact we can have on our conventional power partners. It's not good enough to sit with His Excellency, a minister or another, and say, look, we're going to take your cost of power from 10, 15 cents burning gas to 3 cents with wind. Egypt, for example, has 3 cents wind because you have amazing wind. That's not enough. We have to think about the overall ecosystem. At the country level, it may be a win, but we may be creating a social issue. So ESG has an S in the middle, social impact. So we need to focus on that. We have a little bit of experience. We were the largest, in our first fund, we were the largest private investor in Egypt. We were the largest private investor in Jordan. And the first fund dedicated $15 million to social projects, training those communities around our plants so that more people could get the local jobs that are created by the constructions, mitigating this impact. So we're very lucky. 80% of the 4,200 jobs we created stayed with those communities. In our second fund, we have now allocated $35 million to the same effect. We were criticized for that because at the end, we're a private equity investor. We have a duty to our investors. But the reality is that the investors benefited the most. Because what you do is you bring the communities with you. to build your plans, and they make sure that your plans get done on time. And all of our plans were finished on time and better than budget. And that's a very rare story to tell in emerging markets. And it's my belief, and those of my partners at Alcázar Energy, that it's because we made an investment early on in the S or ESG near our projects. So that I think is what private equity can do better. And I think if we look at the soft factor, I love Sarah's presentation, but if we attach it from the soft side, that's how we can get to that $1 trillion for EM. Thank you.
Thank you for raising the issue and the importance of the social impact as well when we're looking at these investments. This panel is about raising ambition, and I am hearing a lot of ambition from all of our panelists. Sir Danny, though, I'd like to give you the final word as a representative of AIIB. You've had a chance to listen to the perspectives of our friends from the world of banking and finance, as well as the reflections of Minister Prakash. So tell us, what does, in your view, the AIIB need to do to ensure that public and private sectors work more effectively together to mobilize the capital that we need to fight climate change?
It's amazing how fast the discussion passed, because I wasn't sure I was ready for my closing remarks yet. But I think, firstly, I'd like to thank the panel, because I think this has been a really interesting discussion and, shows what is being done and what can be done. And I would also like to thank our keynote speakers. I thought that the vision that Sarah showed us of her experience of the refugee camp in Jordan, and the way you described it as, is this the post-climate apocalypse future, is really an arresting image and an arresting idea, and one that we should all take away from this discussion. I was on a panel at the UN General Assembly last week, talking about part of the Climate Ambition Summit. And the host, who was one of the Deputy Secretary Generals, said, there are two sessions here. One is about passion and one is about money. So we have an hour and a half, right? And so the passion was all these politicians. I used to be a politician, I can say that, right? And they took about an hour and a quarter of the allocated hour and a half, and they showed their passion. And there was no time left really for the money to talk. And I think what's interesting about this discussion is that in order to solve this problem, the passion and the money have to come together. And listening to all of the speakers here, actually that's what we're seeing happen. We're seeing the understanding of the challenge that needs and the financial innovation and the instruments from our colleagues here from the private sector, really coming together and unleashing some innovation. And I think it's that innovation that we have to really generate in order to try and address the problems that Minister Prakash raised in his comments, because you've got to bring together what the private sector can do, what MDBs can do, and what concessional finance can do. And especially now we're seeing more and more interest from philanthropic organizations also in being involved in this space. And I think it's only by having those kind of partnerships that we can unlock the financing at the scale that's needed to deliver the kind of change that you were talking about and rightly talking about. And I think that is also really an imperative for organizations like the AIIB to address the problems and the difficulties that you raised in terms of both the impact of climate change on your people and how to unlock the enormous potential that your country has to also be a source of solutions for others in terms of renewable energy. But still, maybe it's because I'm naturally an optimist, I want to also leave on a note of hope, which is that what we've seen in the world in the last several years is leaders around the world recognizing the scale of the challenge, recognizing the need, putting pressure on organizations like ours and on organizations like yours to step up to the plate, to innovate. And I think if we continue to do that at the scale and pace that is needed, then we have a good chance of making a serious impact on this problem. And as Sarah reminded us, it's on us. It's not something we can leave to the next generation to solve. We have to sort it out, because the logic of how emissions feed through to temperature rises shows that if we don't seriously bend the curve on emissions during this decade, the 2020s, then we'll miss the chance to keep global temperature rises to 1.5 or even 2 degrees. So we have to solve this problem. Thank you.
We absolutely must. Please join me in giving a very warm round of applause to thank our keynote speaker and this wonderful panel. Thank you all very much. Shall we come in the middle here somewhere for a joint photo? Maybe you can join in the middle if you go down and come up.